Election day is just 3 weeks away, and polls show the race is tighter than ever. A new Harvard Caps Harris poll shows while Vice President Harris leads nationally, former President Trump is gaining in some of the critical swing states, which could spell bad news for Democrats. Joining us now is CEO and chairman of Stagwell, chairman of the Harris poll, and former senior advisor to the Clintons, Mark Penn. Mark, thanks so much for joining us. We mentioned it earlier. Your latest polling shows Vice President Kamala Harris leading among likely voters overall, but former President Trump taking the lead with voters in battleground states. Is this a major warning sign for the Harris campaign?
Well, I don't know if it's a warning sign. I mean, it's a pretty good accomplishment for the Harris campaign, given where Biden was, to be ahead at all in the vote. I think what's happened is our polls generally had more percentage points for Trump, and we have closed. And some of the other polls that had more percentage points for Biden and Harris, they have closed. So the inevitable conclusion here is that this race is going into the final couple of weeks too close to call.
With just a few weeks to go to Election Day, 14% of voters still say they are weighing their choices. How does this number compare to past elections just a few weeks out? And could we see these numbers stay the same up to November 5th? Are voters going to be choosing as they walk into the election booth?
I think that number will whittle down, but it's a relatively small number. I think a lot of those folks wind up not voting at all. So it's probably half don't vote, probably half vote, they'll split. So again, the ability to move the election on the basis of undecideds here has narrowed to a pretty small proposition. Maybe there's a half a point or a point. I mean, after all, these voters are undecided. I don't expect them to break solidly one way or the other.
Early voting continues to kick off in states across the country. While early voting tends to help Democrats, how do you think it's going to impact battleground states this election cycle?
This is probably the most significant finding out of this poll, if true. I mean, it's the first time with this cycle we've asked it, but it really shows that in the battleground states, the mail-in votes were equally distributed between Republicans and Democrats, and that the overall lead that Democrats were getting out of mail-in voters still significant, like 43 to 51 in favor of the Democrats, but grossly narrowed from the 2-1 that we saw in the last cycle. Now, this is super important because if you think about it, a vote that's cast is a vote that's in the bank. A vote that someone says they're going to vote, if most of those people are, say, Trump voters, and there's bad weather or kids skin knees or other reasons that people don't vote, most of those people who don't show up at the polls will be the remaining voters, which in the past were heavily Republican. And so the Democrats were getting a big advantage out of banking those votes. That advantage is being cut and maybe even is zero in the swing states.
The top issues for voters this election cycle continue to be inflation and immigration, with 46% saying inflation is the most important issue to them personally. Could the election come down to each campaign's pitch on economic policy?
Well, it certainly should. I mean, that's been the tradition among campaigns that it is the economy stupid. It is true that that's how most campaigns kind of pivot. This seems to be an odd duck in that if that were really the case, I think Trump would be significantly ahead. On the issue of inflation, he has a significant lead. But I think the Harris campaign has also done a reasonably good job at cutting those issue leads down so that on the economy, they're relatively small compared to what they were, whereas actually they're quite big on, of course, immigration and on foreign policy issues.
Now, sticking to your economy polling, 2 in 5 say the U.S. economy is strong today. It's a slight uptick from last month, and 6 in 10 say their personal economics are fair or poor right now. Who at this point is more trusted on the economy?
Well, Trump is more trusted on the economy, but only by a couple of points. And I think that that specifically where he has the traction is on the inflation issue, as opposed to the job issue, where Democrats are in pretty good stead. So normally, again, if 6 in 10 are unhappy with the economy, the ins or outs, we wouldn't be saying it's too close to call. We wouldn't be saying we couldn't do it. So clearly, they're not voting on the economy alone. Clearly, they're voting on a number of other issues. You know, I think the most telling thing generally has been that the the Kamala voters are generally voting either because they like her or don't like Trump. And generally, if they're voting for Trump, it's not on whether they like Trump or not, it's that they like the issues that he represents. And so that is a stark contrast in how the voters are picking among these two candidates. And it's a resulting in a very, very close, almost dead even race.
All right, Mark Penn, appreciate your insight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Turning now to Lebanon, where earlier Monday, an Israeli airstrike hit an apartment building, killing at least 18 people. That's according to the Lebanese Red Cross. The target of that strike is still unclear. The strike happening just a day after Hezbollah attacked an Israeli army base in northern Israel, killing 4 soldiers and critically wounding 7 others. Meantime, the U.S. making its strongest indication yet that it's getting involved in Israel's conflict with Iran. The U.S. is sending an air defense system known as a Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Battery, or THAAD, to Israel, along with about 100 American troops. The Pentagon saying the move is meant to protect its ally. News Nation's Tom Dempsey has the latest.
The U.S. Department of Defense says President Joe Biden signed off on this decision to send troops and equipment for a unit that's part of what's called a high-altitude air defense system. The Army operates these units, and according to a report done by the Congressional Research Service, each one requires around 95 soldiers to operate the equipment. This deployment to Israel will likely include around 6 truck-mounted launchers and 48 interceptors, as well as radar and radio equipment. The THAAD air defense system can hit targets up to 120 miles away and can be used to destroy short and medium-range ballistic missile threats. In the announcement of this deployment, the Pentagon press secretary writing, quote, "This action underscores the United States' ironclad commitment to the defense of Israel and to defend Americans in Israel from any further ballistic missile attacks by Iran." But this decision to send this special air defense system to Israel comes during, obviously, a very heightened tension with Iran, which shot 180 missiles at Israel earlier this month. In a post to X, Iran's foreign minister issued a warning, writing, quote, "While we have made tremendous efforts in recent days to contain an all-out war in our region, I say it clearly that we have no red lines in defending our people and interests." This decision to send this air defense system to the Middle East will only add on to that tension in the region and could be a sign that Israel could be planning some sort of maneuver in response to those missile launches by Iran. In Washington, D.C., I'm Tom Dempsey, News Nation.
Thank you, Tom. Meantime, China launching a massive military exercise in the Taiwan Strait just days after Taiwan celebrated the founding of its government on its National Day. China launched a record 125 aircraft as well as an aircraft carrier group over the weekend. The Chinese made it clear the exercises were to punish Taiwan's president for saying in his national address that Taiwan would resist annexation or encroachment from China. The Chinese military held similar drills back in May when Taiwan's president was inaugurated. The U.S. called China's drills unwarranted and called on Beijing to avoid any further action that may undermine peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.